Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants, coming to you from our podcast studio presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. Joining us today is the lead play-by-play man for Fox NFL. You can also find him as a big part of Fox's baseball coverage as well. I will ask one question about that at the end. An old friend of mine, Jersey native, Kevin Burkhardt. KB, what's going on, man?
Melky, baby. Good to see you. I'm excited. We're talking football. We're back. Life is good, my man.
Yeah, and we're very excited because you are on the call for the opener for the Giants at the Commanders coming up this Sunday at 1 o'clock on Fox. And look, you grew up in the NFC East, KB, I know. You must be excited to have Giants Commanders as your week one matchup.
Yeah, listen, you know me. I love the old NFC East matchups. And I think growing up in North Jersey, I never get to see family and friends because we haven't had too many Giants games, right? So I'm dying for them to get some wins and for us to go back and do some games. I just love the feel of these games, Giants, Commanders, whoever it is, like in that division. To me, it has a special place in my heart. And it's got a good vibe to this one. It does, with Washington reaching the championship game for the first time in 30 plus years last year. And it just feels to me, even though I haven't been there a day from the opposite coast, it just feels like there's a lot of good vibes with the Giants, going back to their playoff year in 2022. Like it feels like the worm is turning a little bit. In week one, obviously everybody's optimistic.
Yeah, look, if you can't be optimistic about your team on August 28th, I think you got problems. I think this is the optimism time for everybody. But look, KB, I'm with you. I mean, as we sit here, I have not seen this many positive vibes heading into a Giants season, probably since the year after their 2022 playoff run. And even then, it was muted a little bit. Do you even get the sense being out there on the West Coast now that there is more optimism surrounding the Giants and kind of where they're heading right now?
Well, yeah, I do, and again, I have family and friends all throughout Jersey, so I get the reports from them, and they're fired up. But I think just the moves that they made, right? I mean, obviously last year was a disaster, but in reality, since their playoff win in the game that Daniel Jones had the best game of his life, with injuries and not playing well and other things that occurred. It was just the worst case scenario, right? So what did they do? They loaded up their quarterback room with guys who can play and guys who are veterans. Like Russell Wilson, you know what you're going to get. I'm not saying he's Russell Wilson of 23 years old, but he's going to be a leader. He's going to be a professional. He is going to be a solid, he's the guy who you want leading your team, especially when you're a young team and trying to kind of find your way through the forest. I think it's a perfect sign. And then you go draft the quarterback you think could be your guy for the next 15 years. So there's that vibe. And then the reality is they're young, and they were young last year. So how do those guys jump to the second year and see how they do? But they added a couple like really good veterans besides Russ. I love what they did on defense, bringing over a Debo and Holland. I mean, that's so much better and so much stability. And I think leadership, Holland's he's a leader. I think that's also part of it is finding, I'm not trying to take shots at the previous team, but it's like finding like the leaders that could shepherd the young guys to success. I think that's what Joe Shane tried to do. It's pretty evident with the roster building. And so now we'll see talent-wise how it lays out to the rest of the league.
Yeah, and look, Joe Shane said that. He said a big goal was to bring in leaders, and Brian Daboll said that he wants a player-driven leadership model where you're relying on your
Yeah.
players. And look, you mentioned Russell Wilson, and you mentioned it's a young team. When Russell Wilson was going to and winning Super Bowls, a lot of the guys in this roster were in high school. So they get here, they see a guy that they watched on TV win a Super Bowl, and I think there's an automatic level of respect and confidence for him where they're willing to listen, they're willing to learn. And I think to your point, with a young team, that really does go a long way.
Yeah, and he's a good player, right?
Yeah.
No, again, he's not running around like he used to be in Seattle. But look, I know the ending last year in Pittsburgh was not good. They lost their last 5 games. They had a couple tough losses, and then they lose in the playoffs. So I know people, that's the first thing they're going to point to. But the reality is he brought stability to their offense and to their team last year. It just was a bad finish. So I think he is perfect for what the Giants are trying to do right now. Obviously, they want to win as many games as possible. But in doing that and trying to be a playoff team and also set it up where you could have Jackson, learn and come in. And by the way, I don't think if he sits out the entire year, it's a bad thing. I know we're in this role now where every guy gets drafted and they play. It's not necessarily the best thing in the world. the only person you have to look to is Patrick Mahomes, who sat for a year, and no one seems to remember that Alex Smith was the chief starter. I think that is a good thing for him to sit and watch and learn and just to absorb a little bit. That I know as a fan, you of course want the kid to start week one. That's always the way it is. But I think it's a perfect situation. I really do.
Yeah, and dude, just look at the guy that won the Super Bowl last year. Jalen Hurts didn't start right away either. Like
No, there's been a lot of guys that have had success doing that, right? Jordan Love in Green Bay sat for 3 years, right? And it obviously they had Aaron there who was great, but and I get it. This mode where you draft kid and guys' jobs are on the line, you throw them in there. It's not always the best thing. Jaden Daniels was an anomaly, right? There are not too many rookies that come in and do what he did. He was freaking awesome, and he's a star. But that just doesn't happen every day. So I like the situation that the Giants are in this year. I really do.
And we will get to the Commanders certainly. And Kevin, you were what's going on down here in New York, and the offensive line has been a really big question for a long time. This is airing on Wednesday. We're recording the week prior, so we're not sure about Andrew Thomas yet. By the time this airs, we might not even have an official injury report yet on whether or not he's going to play. He's on schedule. The intention is for him to play, but I got to imagine that's going to be a big thing you guys are going to be talking about in the booth is his presence and whether or not this offensive line can protect Russell Wilson to throw those moon balls, to run those deep play action passes, right? Because he's so much better when he's clean back there rather than running for his life.
Yeah, I mean, he's look, that has been a humongous question with the Giants for years now. And Andrew Thomas, one of the best. That Liz Frank injury is no joke. And I know he's trying to come back to play week one, but obviously the Giants' goal is to make sure he's good for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. But I think it's also, John, it's consistency. I mean, they had a rotating bunch of guys. Like every week, it was a different starting combination for them last week. You cannot win doing that. And part of it is obviously luck, but it's being good. But part of being good is having that consistency on the offensive line. And I agree with you. Like Russell, look, he could still move, but he's not going to scramble away and run for 30 yards every time there's pressure in his face, right? He is the best deep thrower in the game. I want to see those deep balls to Neighbors and to Hyatt and to Slayton and those guys, but you got to have consistency there. And so I think obviously when Thomas comes back, that's the number one thing, but just overall stay healthy, let that group play together and see if they could bond and actually be a decent O-line. That's going to be such a big key.
You mentioned Neighbors, and he had a monster year last year, but I think a lot of that was lost because frankly, the Giants won 3 games and people weren't paying attention a ton. I think if he comes out in this big week 1 game here, has a monster game against the Commanders, this could be like a real coming out party on the national stage for Malik Neighbors because you really didn't have that in a national game last year. He could have an absolute monster year.
I agree. I mean, I think it's a really good point. It's one of those things because the Giants didn't win and their offense was obviously, last in the league that didn't get the credit. And, he was right behind Brock Bowers for the rookie record. Ironic that both guys in the same class are going for that record. So I will say this, though. I'm not worried about Neighbors, and you're right. I think he could explode in that game. It'll be a fun national story just for everyone to be like, whoa, this guy is really good for those who didn't watch him in New York. But I'm wondering who else is it going to be? I mean, his target share last year was almost 30%.
Yeah, it was astronomical.
It's astronomical. Like, he's great, and it's amazing the season he had with all the, dysfunction is not the right word, but you know what I mean, with all the stuff going on around him and the changing quarterbacks, and it's amazing he did what he did, but they got to have somebody else. There needs to be a 2 and a 3 option here besides Neighbors for their offense to really go. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to seeing besides Neighbors. Neighbors is great, and it'll be cool for him to go off for the national audience to see. But I think for the Giants, maybe their biggest question is who's after him? Like, who else is going to catch passes and really step up on a 3rd and 7 that Russell can get the ball to him?
The Giants Huddle podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. The Giants Foundation will host a 5K racing kids run presented by Quest on Sunday, October 26th at 9 a.m. at MetLife Stadium. Net proceeds will benefit the Giants Foundation. All participants will receive a commemorative t-shirt after the race. Stay for a festival with appearances by Giants legends and a live DJ. Register now at giants.com/5K. The Giants Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does. Make sense of your money with Citizens. official bank of Eli Manning.
Yeah, look, Darius Slayton got paid this year, but look at the contract as more of a number 3 wide receiver contract than a number 2 wide receiver contract. Wanda Robinson has caught a lot of passes, but a lot of short stuff not down the field. Could it be Theo Johnson, the second-year tight end out of Penn State? And then I think you look at the running back room, too. It's really exciting, Kevin. I mean, Tyrone Tracy, I think, is a really good player. People don't realize it yet. I don't know how much Cam Scadaboo is going to have a role early after missing a lot of time in camp. But I think if they want to recreate a little bit how Russell Wilson had success in Seattle, the run game should be a big part of this, where you're not putting everything on the quarterback and you're providing him that type of balance. You can use play action if you can get that running game going early.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I really totally agree with you there, John. Like, Tracy had a really good year behind us. We talked about that offensive line, which was a bit of a mess last year. I mean, 1,000 total yards for him. Like, that's solid rookie campaign. I think Scadaboo is really fun, and we'll see how they use him, but he's like a human bowling ball, which you guys got to see. I think they've got some options there. We'll see how Theo does in his second year. He showed some flashes and promise catching balls. I just think, before Wandale got hurt, before he blew his knee out, he showed some really good flashes. And I think he can be like that slot guy, that big third down guy, not just the dump off guy. I think he could have a big year, especially early on with Russell Wilson, on those key downs. Like, if it's not Neighbors, we know Neighbors is great. But I'm curious for week 1, who else it's going to be.
No, I'm with you. I think it'll be fun. All right, let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball very quickly. You mentioned it. This could be one of the best pass rushers in the league. Now, can the offense get them a lead so the pass rush can do their thing? Can they stop the run so the pass rush can do their thing? But if one or two of those things click, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, who knows where they're going to line him up every play. I mean, just looking at the talent, this could be, last year they had 45 sacks. People don't realize this. They were 8th in the NFL with 45 sacks last year. You could pop over 50 this year and be top 3 if everything goes right.
The key phrase you mentioned there is having a lead. I mean, they never led games last year. It wasn't even that they didn't win it. They didn't lead. I think they had, I forget the minutes total, but they were leading the fewest amount of minutes in the league last year. And so hard to peel your ears back and go after the quarterback when you're constantly behind, when you have to really play both and play action. I agree with you. I think it's going to be interesting. I'm fascinated. We know Sexy Dexy and what he brings to the table. Obviously with Carter, the 1 pick. I'm really curious. Burns is so consistent. You're going to get from him. I'm just curious to see what Thibodeau does. I think it's kind of a big year for him and see how he performs, especially with the drafting of Carter and kind of mixing him in and what kind of role he's going to play. But I do think they're improved. And look, they improved a lot last year. They got to basically the middle of the pack, in some categories. And I think that line, I love Okereke. I think he's a consummate professional leader in the middle of that D and a good tackler. He got hurt at the end of last year. And then the additions of the secondary, there's no question they're better. And I agree with you. If they get the chance, they could be, the best pass rushing unit in the league. But they got to have the lead. They got to have some fourth quarters where they're in front, at least by a field goal, and get a chance to really show what they can do.
All right, let's jump over to the Commanders, who the Giants get in week number 1. Obviously, came out of nowhere last year behind Jaden Daniels, who had an unbelievable rookie year. You had him in the NFC title game against the Eagles in a game where they scored plenty of points. They just couldn't get any stops. Is that going to be a similar problem, do you think, for them this year? Do you think they've done enough on defense where they're able to clean up that side of the ball a little bit?
Well, I did their game in Detroit, too, when they just gashed the Lions, and that was so impressive. Look, I think offensively they're good. I think that Jaden Daniels, people were going to say, well, the league has a year to look at him in the offseason, how they're going to respond to him. And absolutely, that is part of it, and that's always the case, is how do they respond, right? And for Washington fans, they're like, well, we saw this with RG3. How is our guy going to respond? I think Jaden Daniels is a star. I think he's a superstar. He's smart. He's got it all. He's obviously not a big guy, so you worry about that when he runs. They traded away Brian Robinson, which was their lead back, but I think they've got enough versatility there. They bring over Deebo Samuel. I just like what they have to offer. They've got a good offensive line. So that's offense. Defensively, it's going to be interesting. They lost Dante Fowler, who was their leading sack guy, and they replaced him with Von Miller, who's 36 years old. Von's great. He's the all-time active sack leader. He's, a Hall of Famer. But I don't know what Von is going to give at age 36. I think defensively, their big weakness is I think there's a couple questions. First of all, can they stop the run? Because they couldn't do it last year. And I don't know that they're much better in that area this year. And then the other thing is, I think for them, which is a big deal, they had a great draft last year. Mikey Sainer still was amazing, and I mean, he was so good in the secondary. And I like their safeties. That they've got good versatility. But I think the key for them in going from a good defense to a great defense is Marshawn Lattimore, the guy that he was 3-4 years ago for New Orleans, or is he just okay and little injury prone right now? I think, they traded for him hoping he's still the one guy. And injuries have been a big reason why you haven't been able to see that. But I think that is a humongous key for Washington.
And look, Kevin, they've kind of gone all in here. Like they traded a bunch of draft picks in the offseason, whether it was the Deebo Samuel trade, you mentioned the Marshawn Lattimore trade. They probably have one of the older rosters in the league. I think they're trying to take advantage of this window with Jaden Daniels on his rookie contract.
Yeah, you know what happened? They brought in the new regime, and obviously it's been a total changeover, right? With Josh Harris, the owner, and Adam Peters, who's so great, worked under John Lynch for all those years in San Francisco, and then Dan Quinn, who's an awesome coach. And their initial thing was, we're going to bring over some good kind of what we're talking about with the Giants, honestly. Yeah. We're going to bring over some good veteran leadership and be a decent football team, right? They won 4 games 2 years ago. The Giants should look to them and see, like, I think the formula is kind of what they're trying to do, with the exception of with the exception of Daniels play right out of the gate and Jackson Dart is sitting. But they just wanted to go from a bad football team to a competent football team and build a culture with Dan Quinn. And it turned out they had a lot of guys play really, really well, and the rookies played great, and they weren't a good football team. They were an excellent football team. So I think, yes, they're older, but, with what happened last year, they're like, okay, well, we're good. We're just going to add to that now. And try and win now. Now, the key is going to be down the road. They're going to have to turn that over at some point. But I think right now, for the next year or two, who cares? You try and win. You got a quarterback who's not making any money, and that's when you can spend on the older veterans. That's what Seahawks did with Russell Wilson when he was a kid. They spent all this money on the Legion of Boom and all these guys, and they didn't pay Russell anything, and that's why they won, because they didn't have the money tied up in the quarterback. So I think the Giants, ironically, you look at the Commanders, I don't think the formula is that different. I think a lot of what they did is what Washington tried to do last year when they went from 4 wins to 12 in a single year.
And I got to give Adam Peters credit. You mentioned that second year for a rookie, progress is not always linear, right? Look at C.J. Stroud last year. He had a similar rookie year to Jaden Daniels. Last year, didn't look as good. Now, a lot of that to do with what was going on around C.J. Stroud. They couldn't protect him. The offensive line was a mess. And I got to give Adam Peters some credit. I think he said to himself, in order to avoid that potential regression from Jaden Daniels, I'm loading up on offense in the offseason. I'm bringing in a left tackle that I know is awesome in Laramie Tunsil. I'm bringing in a guy that he can throw a 2-yard pass to in Deebo Samuel that can turn into a 20-yard gain. And I think he really said, I'm going to try to build an infrastructure around this quarterback to make sure we don't have what happened to C.J. Stroud last year in Houston.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I really do. And I think the biggest difference is, now look, we'll see. And they've been a little banged up in camp. So, Cosme's out to start the year, one of their really good linemen. But they've got a better line than Houston did last year, at least on paper. And they played that way, last year. So I think the protection part, I think the fascinating thing for me watching their offense is not only, yes, how they use Deebo, who by all accounts kind of is looking really, really good. He had a pneumonia bout last year and it really messed with him. And it hurt him a lot. But I think it's how much are they still doing all the same things with Jaden that they did last year? Because you know how it goes. First year, you kind of throw it out there. He's running for 800 yards. You let him go and do his thing. And that's who he is. But then the mindset is a little bit, well, got to keep him healthy, right? So it's like, you got to keep him healthy. So I think the play calling and how Cliff Kingsbury handles it, kind of a fascinating thing in year 2 with Daniels. Like we know how good he is, but how much of that stuff do you do the same? How much do you think, well, got to protect our franchise guy now, maybe not call some of those things as much?
Yeah, I think it'll be fun to see. All right. Do you think this could be a high-scoring game, Kevin? The Giants generally do not play in high-scoring games. They have not scored many points over the past, 3-4 years. But I think this could be a really fun up and down, ball getting thrown down the field type of, not very typical Giants, Commanders go back in the day, 80s Giants, Redskins types of game.
Yeah, I could see that all day long. I really can. I could see Russell Wilson throwing all the deep balls, getting some time to throw the ball. I think, though, ironically for the Giants, I think their formula might be the opposite. I think, what you said earlier in this podcast, if I'm them, I want to keep Jaden Daniels off the field. So I want to get the run game going, get the play action that Russell is so good at. And I try to limit their possessions on offense. Now, that goes out the window. Washington scores, 2 touchdowns on the first 2 possessions. I could see them airing it out. It could be a really, really fun game. But I think for the Giants to win, I think the formula is actually the other way around. But I'm no coach. We'll see what Dave thinks, John. We'll see. But I could see there's a lot of talent on this. It's a fun matchup for week 1. It really is.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
If there's a matchup that you see in this game, Kevin, where do you see one that could really kind of be that fulcrum matchup that could tip the game one way or the other that you think is very important when you look at the two, rosters and how they match up? We know how much the NFL is a matchup league week to week.
Yeah. It's definitely going to start with the Giants pass rush against their O-line. But I'm going to let me think about that for just a second and just think about this game. I do think I really am going to go with, Washington's run defense against the Giants run game. If we're going to find out about this Giants offensive line, whether Andrew Thomas plays or not, let's see if they can run the ball. Let's see what Tracy can do and whoever else they throw in there can do against what was their weakness last year. I'm trying to exploit that if I'm the Giants and see if I get that run game going and using, Russell Wilson is so good at the play pass. I just think that's got big play potential written all over it. So that's the matchup I'm going to look at. Tyrone Tracy, run game. How does he do against that Washington line, which struggled against the run last year? And yes, they've got a couple new pieces on that line, but let's see if they can stop it.
No, I like that. I think that's a really good point. All right, around the league, make the case, Kevin. We haven't seen a repeat winner in the NFC East since, I believe, 2004 when Andy Reid and Donovan McNabb did it for the Philadelphia Eagles. Make the case. How do either the Cowboys, Giants, or Commanders knock the Eagles off that perch this year, given how talented that roster is?
Yeah, they're good. I mean, it's always hard to repeat. We know that, right? And a lot of it is mental and it's the motivation and guys always talk about. I think from a talent perspective, their roster is completely loaded. Now they're younger. They lost some guys, some key guys from that defense last year. I would say for Philly, the one thing is this: depth, right? They had depth with their young guys last year. And granted, a lot of them ended up playing and being key contributors. But now, because they lost some of those veterans on defense because they had to get paid and they're trying to structure this window to win for a while, they don't have at least the proven depth they don't have. So, I think for the Eagles, it's can they stay healthy, number one. I think they're going to be what they're going to be. They're going to run the ball down your throat. And when they need to throw it, Jalen Hurts is pretty damn good with 2 of the best receivers in the league. Their defense was so good last year. Will they have any growing pains early, especially earlier in the year with some of the new pieces, some of the younger guys? But I think right now, like with the way the roster is on paper, they're good. There's no question about it. It's how do they handle success? That's what it comes down to. That's what Jimmy Johnson always used to talk about with the Cowboys. Like, how do you handle success? And that's going to be fascinating to watch. And obviously their schedule's tough. Maybe not as tough as the Giants, which I still don't understand how they've got like this insanely hard. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But look, man, it's NFC East. As you know, no one seems to win the division ever back-to-back years. It never happens. So, John, nothing would surprise me. And I do think it's going to be a really good division. I think it's going to be close. Like I think the Eagles are really good. I don't know, just because of repeating and because of younger guys and because of how tough their schedule is. I don't know if they're a 14-win team. I think that might be asking a lot. I still think they're a first-place team, but we'll see.
Yeah, look, the NFC East has the NFC North and the AFC West, 2 of the better divisions in football. So I think it could very well kind of shrink that margin, right, in terms of how good the top team is in the division.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where it comes, right? Like, let's say you need 10 wins to win the division instead of 14. Well, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
That's a big difference, and that's gettable if you get a couple big wins or win a couple of these close games, which is something the Giants couldn't do last year either, right? So that's where I think the tide turns if you're a fan of those other teams and how things can change.
The AFC, we know it's going to be Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson battling it out, right? NFC's wide open though. What team do you think might emerge this year? Is it the Lions again? Is it somebody else that you think could make a run in the NFC this year, which I think is a little bit more wide open?
I think it's really good. The NFC, you mentioned, the NFC North is so good. I think the Rams are fantastic if Stafford is healthy.
You are like the fourth straight person to pick the Rams, by the way. Like I think people are high on them.
Listen, so I'll give you the quick answer. I think if Stafford's healthy, the Rams are exceptional. I really do. I mean, they were the best chance at beating the Eagles last year. I'm talking the entire season, let alone the playoffs, because they match up well with them. I think Detroit's still going to be very good. They lost 2 coordinators, so there's something to prove there. I'll say this. I think the biggest question mark is J.J. McCarthy from Minnesota, right? Because he didn't throw the ball that much at Michigan, because he got hurt last year in camp and you never saw him throw a pass. But if he can play and if he's good, I think Minnesota is a problem. Like I love what they did in the offseason. Their defense, to me, they got Jonathan Allen, they got Javon Hargrave in the middle. They were so tough with Brian Flores last year. They brought in Jordan Mason from the 49ers, who I think is a beast as a runner. And now Aaron Jones can be kind of like that guy who catches passes and does other stuff. I think and Justin Jefferson was hurt last year. I think the Vikings are really good. Look, they won 14 games last year, right? But I think everyone's just expecting them to fall off the table because Darnold left. If McCarthy is good, I think their roster is great. I think their coach is as good a coach as there is in the NFL. I think they could be a real problem. So that's my alter ego other than the Rams. How about that?
I think the Vikings might have the second most talented team in the conference other than Philadelphia. I'm with you.
Roster-wise, they're good. And I agree.
We'll see about the quarterback. All right, final fun question. For people that don't know, Kevin and I go back. I produced the shows on FAN like 05, 06, 07.
The best producer ever, man.
Oh, please stop. But do you ever look around at like Tom Brady? All right, well, there's Derek Jeter. There's A-Rod. There's David Ortiz, and realize these were all of like the most important people in sports that I talked about every day. And now I'm just hanging out with these guys on like a daily basis. Is it just like, do you ever just like pinch yourself and go, my gosh, what's going on here?
It literally makes no sense. Of course, Schmeelk, every day, you know me well, right? Like I don't take it for granted. I love every second of it. And it is just so cool to be able to be around these guys. And the best part is they're all such great teammates and fun to be around. You see sides of them that you didn't see when you're covering athletes, and now they're regular guys, and it's so fun. Like, it's like being on that desk with baseball royalty is unbelievable. And just watching baseball games and yelling at the TV together is crazy. Then I'm in the booth with Tom, and I think one of the coolest things about him, among many things, is, we're in the booth and like there's a big play and like, we're like high-fiving because he's such a football fan. He loves the game so much. So he's like, oh my God, like here's the greatest player of all time, like screaming because, a screen pass got executed well. And he's like, it's so cool. Like I just think as a fan, and you and I are the same, we grew up on the couch, screaming at the TV, and like that's why we got into this industry. To be next to the greatest of greats, and they all are like us, that's what I always tell like my friends. I think that's the most fun part for me.
Make sure you check out Kevin, all the great coverage of baseball on Fox, and of course, he has the call of Giants and Commanders on the first Sunday of the NFL season coming up. Can't wait for it. Kevin, thanks for the time, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, man, can't wait to see you down there. Let's go. Football's back.
Kevin Burkhardt on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, official bank of the Giants, and the Hackensack Marine Hill podcast studio. Keep getting better. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle podcast.